anyway, like I was saying.
All right, Chris, I think we're pretty close.
I'm going to text them to start it.
Sure.
Whatever that was. It's already started in here, so. Well, I guess I know, yeah.
All right. Oh, I don't need it. It doesn't really project there. It's for the online recording.
Are you going to do just an intro, or you just want to go ahead right into it?
I'll let you introduce exactly what kind of bridge is and military focus and all that.
Sounds good.
Jaeger? Is that
Jaeger, yes. And McKenna Olmsted.
All right, folks, so we have David Yeager and McKenna Olmsted. They're with the Kindbridge Institute. I'll let them explain what they do because I'll butcher it more than they will, but they're going to cover our second half here.
And we're going to do enough butchering, so good morning. My name's Dave Yeager.
I'm McKenna.
And we're with Kindbridge Research Institute, and you're going to hear a little bit about what we do in a minute. But before I get into that, first of all, can you go to the next slide? Yes, we have QR codes. We're all about the QR codes. I want to offer just one more piece into what Jamie was talking about earlier and the question that came up about finance as it relates to problematic gambling. There are some schools of thoughts that once you get into recovery for a gambling addiction, then financial education becomes more important. It doesn't really impact the addiction itself, and I too know a number of people who were involved in finance who fell heavily into a gambling addiction. That kind of all goes out the window when the addiction kicks in. But once the recovery begins, then that education becomes more important. So I hope that kind of adds to the answer that we gave. So I am Dave Yeager. I'm an 11-year veteran of the United States Army. I'm also in recovery for a gambling addiction, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that in a minute. And McKenna, do you want to do just a real brief introduction?
Hi, so I'm McKenna Olmsted. I'm coming off a cold. I don't usually sound like I smoke 3 packs a day. That's just for today. But I'm active duty Navy. I'm going to assume there's nobody Navy in the room. Yeah. All right, so I'm a Russian linguist in the Navy, and I'm in the enlisted to medical degree preparatory program. So I'll be starting medical school in the fall at the Uniformed Services University in Bethesda, Maryland. And I'm a military research associate with Kindbridge.
Okay, so one of the things kind of unique to the Air Force Academy is we just had a long conversation about student athletes. We want to add one more element to that. Not only are these student athletes, these are leaders in the military that are developing as we go. So there's an important element to this that goes along with the student athlete piece. If you could go to the next slide, please. But I just want to talk very briefly about us. I'm not going to go too deep into this, but we are Kindbridge Research Institute, and our mission is to provide regulators, legislators, et cetera, to help reduce health inequities with those experiencing gambling disorder in those populations. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. We have very specific populations we focus on, and our number one focus population right now is U.S. military service members and veterans. And that extends out to ROTC, cadets, the whole scope. Okay, so that's, if we dedicate research in these areas, which are underserved populations in the area of problematic gambling and gambling disorder, we better serve ourselves to help improve the force. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so learning objectives today, we're going to keep it real simple. Define gambling and gambling addiction. I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds on that. Provide a basic understanding of gambling as an addiction, how to recognize it and what to do next. Understand why military service members, not just athletes, but military service members are at higher risk as well. Explain the impact of harmful gambling on the service member, family, readiness, and cohesion. Provide examples of the signs and symptoms. We're going to go a little bit deeper on that. And then how to have that conversation as a leader, talking to someone who might have a problem or to a teammate who might have a problem. Okay? Next slide, please. There's many forms of gambling as you can, and I'm not going to ask you to do this for me, but just can you put the first part up there? Everybody familiar with these, right? Nothing up here is a mystery. Casino gambling, poker, sports betting, which we're talking a lot about today, right? And since 2018, I'm from Pennsylvania, and as soon as the Supreme Court said go ahead with it, the state of Pennsylvania jumped right into online gambling and sports gambling, and let me tell you, it became a problem very quickly. Very quickly. So Slot machines, lottery, scratch cards. But let me ask you a question. Go ahead to the next part. What about bingo? Is that a form of gambling? Okay. Loot boxes in games. Are they a form of gambling? Gaming. Cryptocurrency. Off-track betting. Yes, you probably know that. But what about the stock market? What about day trading? Can that be a form of gambling? Okay. And, of course, exchange betting and things like that. Next slide, please. Okay. So, and go ahead and hit that one more time if you would. Gambling very simply comes down to this. It's all about risk. You're risking something of value at the chance of gaining a reward of something of greater value. You'll notice I never once in that entire statement said anything about money. You're risking something of value. It could be your job. It could be your reputation. It could be having to do something for somebody, right? So if I win for the next week, you get to wash my car. If you win for the next week, I get to wash your car. Okay? With the chance of a reward, and that's gambling. For Gamblers Anonymous, which is a 12-step self-help group, they define it as any betting or wagering for self or others, whether for money or not, where the outcome is uncertain and depends upon chance or skill, constitutes gambling. Okay? Why skill? Because you think to yourself, okay, if I'm skilled at something and I know what I'm doing with something, why could I fall into a gambling addiction if I'm skilled at it? Well, just like we talked about with the finance, somebody could be very good at understanding the game of poker. Okay? They could be very good at it. In fact, there was somebody that I was associated with a while back who was a professional baseball player. And as he went through his minor league years, he had a lot of times on buses and then eventually planes where they would play poker. It's what they would do. And he was very good at it. He became very good at understanding the game and kind of how to manipulate the game to his favor. Until the point when he started to win big. And when he started to win big, all of a sudden, all the things that he knew that he could do to kind of hedge his bet, if you will, to kind of make himself better, went out the window. He went from a seven-figure income playing baseball in the U.S. and in Korea to within a year living out of a mobile home park and working little side jobs to try to make ends meet because his addiction took hold of him. That's how quickly this can happen. So, you know, it doesn't matter the knowledge that we carry into this. This addiction doesn't care what socioeconomic group you came from. It doesn't care what your education is. It doesn't care how much money you have. Okay, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to McKenna for the next couple slides.
All right, so I'm taking this slide because it focuses a little bit on the younger gamblers, and I'm going to kind of tell a little bit about my story as well here. So if we start just a little bit talking about what's changed over the years, you no longer need to go somewhere physically to place a bet. You don't need to make a call. Everything is available to you on your phone, which is, you know, very appealing to this generation who just loves to have everything right in front of us, instant gratification. And now it's a lot more detailed. It's not just about who's going to win, who's the underdog. You can bet on everything, every next move, anything you want. And online casinos, again, it's not just a traditional slot machine. They have more complex games. It's super colorful. They have skill-based games, things to appeal to anybody. And then on top of that, if people they like specific games, table games at a casino, you can go on your phone and there's real people running the tables and you can play it right there at home. So you don't even have to go out. You don't have to tell your wife or your husband where you're going. You know, it's just right there available to you. And this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about my story. So I'm not the one who had the gambling problem, but my father is. He still is an active gambler. And what kind of happened with me and how I ended up enlisted in the Navy was I started realizing probably around the time I was in middle school that there were some things that didn't make sense with my family's financial situation. My mom's a public affairs officer in the Air Force, and my dad he was the CFO of a construction company in Alaska. And I realized, you know, I was about 14 at this point, and we were on our second downgrade to a smaller home. My mom actually moved my brother and myself into apartments on the local Air Force base because we could no longer afford to live in our home. We were able to pay our fees to play sports at school. I had to start working at 14, and it wasn't making sense to me anymore because I knew that my friends had parents who had jobs where they wouldn't be making as much, and they were doing a lot better. And my mom it was really important to her that we didn't know about my dad's issues or his problems or his struggles. So I knew that I wasn't going to have money to go to college, not for my family. And I knew at that point that I wanted to go to medical school and I'd be racking up debt from undergraduate and then medical school. So I decided, from the age of 14 was when I could start working. And then at 16, I was dually enrolled in college, and I worked full-time on top of that to save money to go to college. But I was under 18, so I needed my parents to be on my account. So I realized I had saved up about $40,000 over this time period. I worked full-time in the summers. I got a job as a dental assistant. I got a job as a veterinary surgical technician. And once I got into the University of Washington, which was my dream school to go to, and I realized I could pay for the first year and work on scholarships after that. Got in early in the fall, found out that my dad had actually taken all of that money, and he had gambled it away on a business trip when he went to a casino. At that point, I actually did a last-ditch kind of effort to apply to the Air Force Academy. Didn't get in. I'm not bitter about it at all. It's fine. But I did, I was so used to this point kind of disappointment, and my expectations were so low that I just transitioned to my next plan. I didn't want to go to college and take out loans, mostly because I didn't want to be dependent on my family for anything. I didn't want to have to go home to them. I didn't want to need money from them. I needed to get out. So I actually went to the Air Force recruiting office. They were on vacation, but the Navy recruiter was there. So yeah, I was ready to go. So I walked in and I enlisted in the delayed entry program that day. And then I left right after I graduated high school and joined the Navy. Went to the Defense Language Institute, learned Russian. Kind of a weird choice for somebody who wants to go to medical school, but I realized that would be the fastest way to a college degree because you graduate from that technical school with an associate's degree. So while I was there, I had my dual enrolled college credits from high school, got my associates, and I also went to school full-time online while I was a DLI. So I was able to get my bachelor's degree when I was 20, and then right now I'm finishing up my master's degree. Thankfully, the Navy is paying for that and for medical school. So, it worked out for me, but it was really rough. And that's how I kind of got connected with Kindbridge, was I realized that I needed research experience. It was kind of the one thing that my medical school application was missing. Really hard to get that when you're going to school online. You're getting a humanities degree, things like that. And I realized that Kindbridge showed up on this service to schools. So if anybody is interested in, or your students or athletes are interested in, professional or graduate school in the military, Service to Schools helps connect them with mentors who had similar pathways, and they can get letters of recommendation, shadowing, similar things like that. So I signed up for Service to Schools, and they connected me with Kindbridge. And I thought it was really interesting that this research program that is specifically for military students who want to go to professional school for medical school or psychology was about gambling. And I was like, that's a crazy coincidence. I wasn't really ready to talk about my personal story at that point. I hadn't included it on my personal statement for the EMDP2 program. But then through my work with Kindbridge, I actually reconnected with my father. We had been estranged, and I had learned that, the compassion I was showing for the people who I was meeting, my father deserved that too. And it's not really that cut and dry, but I made it that way for both of our benefit. And I've learned a lot from Kindbridge, and I think that it's a really great experience. And it's important to remember that gambling can be anything. Anything that is a risk is a gamble. My father he wasn't just gambling the $50 he would put down or the $100 or the $1,000. He gambled away his family and his job and his career and his livelihood. So you think about that, every time. You can go to the next slide. And then in this one too, I'm not going to read over this to you. I'm sure you're familiar with this. And it's kind of the same deal, is that when you're a student athlete and you're doing things that you're not supposed to do, if you're gambling on games at your school or in your sport, or if you're a coach and you're participating, it's not just the money that you're putting down, it's your livelihood, it's your career, it's everything. So that's something to keep in mind. And when I first saw this slide, I wanted to be like, this is the Air Force Academy, like they're too smart for this. They're not going to be the ones participating in this. And then I remembered every brief who have come to my, enlisted roundtable GMTs, and they're like, oh, you're in the military, like you're too smart for this. And I can think of like 10 times myself or my peers have participated in these activities that are, either just stupid or illicit or whatever. So, nobody's immune from this. And gambling disorder, it's hard for people to associate it with a psychiatric condition because they're not always familiar with the fact that it's just right up there with alcoholism or any other addictive disorder. It's in the DSM-5, it's a psychiatric illness, and it's not a choice that people make. You can go to the next one, and I'll hand it back over to Dave.
What an amazing journey. I mean, for you to take the journey that you took and to be where you're standing right now, thank you so much for what you're doing. I really appreciate it personally. So, and this is a question, we work a lot with ROTC students and whatnot, and I ask this question, so come on, is gambling really an addiction, right? Drugs and alcohol, we know, can be addictive products, but is gambling really an addiction? Well, in 2013, the American Psychiatric Association changed the title and classification of problem gambling from pathological gambling, which is an impulse control disorder, to gambling disorder, and laid it right alongside of drugs and alcohol as an addiction because of the way it functions on the brain, because of the things that it does to us physiologically. Okay, but there's a second part to this. Okay, and before we get to that, I just want to do one thing. This is the point where I tell you my story. Okay, I'm an 11-year veteran of the Army who fell into my addiction while I was on active duty. So I had come down on orders to the Republic of Korea. At the time, I was stationed stateside. I was married in my first marriage with 2 young children, both of them under the age of 10. In fact, both of them under the age of 5. There was a lot going on at the time. It was a very stressful time for me, but I knew I had to do it. So, of course, I got on the plane. I flew into Osan, which many of you may be familiar with, and got off the plane in Osan, already 12 hours separated from here in the States. I'm stressed out. I had been arguing on and off with my first wife through this entire thing. I should probably back up for a minute, and Patrick kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but and Jamie, you kind of spoke to this too, is that oftentimes somebody who falls into an addiction has something that's motivating that addiction. It doesn't happen all the time, but oftentimes there's something. I came out of a dysfunctional home. My mother had remarried when I was very young. My father was an alcoholic. My stepfather, who then replaced my father, was not only an alcoholic, but an abusive alcoholic. And I often call my childhood a terrorist state because it was a lot of beatings, it was a lot of yelling, it was a lot of things that I learned to hide from myself and that I wasn't willing to share with other people because nobody needed to know about me and what I went through when I was a kid, because then they wouldn't look at me the same way. So I learned to compartmentalize real quick. And then I got into basic training in the Army, and I was like, wow, this is easy. All I got to do is say, yes, Sergeant, no, Sergeant, and do what I'm told. And it was actually a lot easier for me because I already had all that compartmentalization in place. So fast forward, we're back to, and I'm going to tell you when this was, and that's going to give away my age. I'm not youthful by any means. This was in 2001, right after 9/11. So September of 2001 was when all this was happening. I left on the plane in November of 2001. So not only was there tension in my house, there was tension in my job. So got on the plane, flew over there, got into Osan, got bussed up to Yongsan Base, which is in Seoul, right in the middle of Korea, to a really, really nice hotel right there on the base. I get settled in. I'm hungry. I get something to eat, but I'm tired but not ready to sleep. So I'm kind of walking around the hotel, and I'm on the bottom floor, and all of a sudden I'm walking by, and I kind of hear this strange noise, so I stop and I look in. And I'm just peeking. I'm like, what is this? Turns out there's a casino-style slot room right there on the base on the hotel, which doesn't happen here in the States, but overseas, they're allowed to be there. And McKenna's actually going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but there's over 3,000 of these things. And where I was in Korea, they were all over on every single base in Korea. Now, I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm an hour and a half from Atlantic City. I had gone to Atlantic City when I was a kid. I would take money with me. If I lost it, great. If I won something, great. I would go home, no big deal. So I thought, okay, I'll take some money out of the ATM. I'll go sit in this room for a while. I'll relax to the point where I can finally get some sleep and just kind of, blow off some steam. Well, Jamie alluded to this, Patrick alluded to this. I made the biggest mistake a budding compulsive gambler could ever make, and I won. Okay? I didn't break the bank. I did not break the bank. I don't even remember what the amount was. It might have been $1,000, if that, right? But it didn't matter. It wasn't about the amount of money that I won. What it was about was in that moment, I can remember my shoulders starting to relax. So I continued to play, right? And as I continued to play, all of a sudden I noticed all of the stress, all of the hurt that I was feeling, all of the things that were going on with me that I did not want to deal with in that moment went away temporarily. They were gone. It felt good. And I'm not going to say that I became a compulsive gambler in that moment, but I will say that to me, because I can remember it as clearly as I'm standing here right now talking to you, to me it was the start of it for me. That, I went on, I processed up in Yongsan. They took me on a van, my unit picked me up, they took me down to Busan, which was at the southern end of the peninsula. I was the non-commissioned officer in charge of my unit down there. Got down there, and it wasn't long before I realized I got into the community club there and saw the little back room again, and sure enough, there's another slot room right there. So that weekend, I said, okay, I'll spend another couple hours in here and just have some fun. Well, that one Saturday night turned into Friday and Saturday night, turned into Friday, Saturday, Sunday night, turned into Monday through Friday, turned into now I'm taking lunch breaks to go to this room, because what started off as an enjoyable little escape for me now became a necessity. It was rapidly becoming a necessity, and I'm going to say it was probably 3 months until I reached this point, until it became a necessity. Then what started happening was the money that my wife at the time was depositing into my account over there, so I had spending money, right? Now all of a sudden it was running out, and I didn't have it anymore. But I still wanted to go to this room. I still had the drive to want to step into this room. So then I took some of the things that I had. I had a bicycle with me, a pretty nice one, some electronic equipment. I went out and sold it so that I would have money to gamble, thinking, oh, I'm going to win it back. No big deal. I'll get it back, and then I'll just, I'll buy those things back. Didn't happen. It got continually worse. Then I started giving my wife excuses. Oh, this soldier needs to go here. This soldier needs money for that. I need money for a trip I'm taking, so she would give me more. And at first she did. Until all of a sudden she started to say, wait a minute, something's not right here. You don't need this much extra money to do all these things. A lot of stuff keeps happening to you. So that cut off that source for me as well. The next step here, and every time I tell this, and I've been telling this for quite a few years now, the next step that happened here embarrasses me to this day because of how much pride I took in being a good non-commissioned officer. Mind you, during this time, I went out and got my expert field medical badge. If you know anything about that in the Army, that ain't easy to get, right? I was developing a squad to go out and do trainings to the point where they were so efficient they could have an RFAB up within 10 minutes. And this was just a small squad of people, right? We were getting very good at what we were doing. I developed a training plan that actually our headquarters in Seoul took and was actually feeding out to the other units that we had on the peninsula. So all these things were happening, yet at the same time, and here it comes, I was borrowing money from my subordinates. Okay? A leader in the military does not borrow money from subordinates. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. But a leader in the military does not borrow from their subordinates. You're responsible for their well-being. I was responsible for their well-being. I was responsible for their development. And here I am borrowing money from them to foster my habits. It continued to get worse over the rest of that year, to the point where nearing the end of the year, I did the one thing that finally kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. I took from my petty cash fund in my unit. Now I committed a federal crime, right? One that could have easily sent me on a PCS to Fort Leavenworth. When they started the investigation, I had so much shame and so much guilt that had piled up by then that I sat down, I looked them in the eye and said, you don't need to go any further. I'm the one who did it. Here's exactly what I did. Because I felt like I can't believe I'm doing these things. I can't believe I'm taking these actions. I'm not this person. And to the person looking at it from the outside, they may be looking at me going, who is this guy? Why did he fake all these good things he was doing while he's out here being such a bad person? It wasn't about being a bad person. It was about the addiction beginning to take over and drive me to do what I did. So I got called back down to Seoul. I immediately lost my position in Busan. I got put on work details in Seoul while I got to go see my commander. My commander looked me in the eye and said to me, we don't know what to do with you because there's so many good things happening right now. There's this one character piece. He never said to me gambling. He said there's this one character piece we need to deal with. So I got dropped one rank and I got sent on my way. And I'm saying this now because, that commander was wonderful, and to this day I would work for that man if I could. He was a wonderful individual, but the understanding of this addiction just wasn't there, right? Had I gone in there with a drug or alcohol problem, he would have known exactly what to do with me. Yes, I still would have lost rank, and by the way, he was right to drop me in rank and should have done more. He should have done more. The UCMJ is fairly clear about these things. This should be happening much worse. But because of the balance of what I was doing, by the way, that same day I went and saw my first sergeant and got an NCOER, right, an evaluation with pretty high scores on it with the exception of one area, character. I got the highest scores you can get except that one area. You talk about confusing because I didn't know what was going on with me. I knew I wanted to gamble. I knew I wanted to keep doing it and I couldn't stop. but I didn't know exactly what was happening. I didn't know that this was an addiction. Okay? So I got sent on to my next unit. I moved on. I got down to South Carolina, where I went to next. And lo and behold, it started to happen again. Not quite as bad. I wasn't stealing from anybody. I wasn't borrowing from subordinates, but I was still gambling. And I didn't know how to stop, and then came my first suicide attempt. I had a bunch of painkillers I had for my back, and just decided to pop them all because nobody could figure me out. I couldn't figure me out. What's the purpose of even being here anymore? Woke up in a hospital with my NCOIC and my wife standing there looking at me going, you need to get some help. And me looking at them going, really? No kidding. Right? So I went and got help. But what I did was I found a civilian counselor because I was off base. I was in a civilian area. Found a civilian counselor, told them what I thought they wanted to hear because my wife always wanted to go with me to these sessions, told them what I thought they wanted to hear so we could get through the session, and continued gambling. Kept doing it. I lied. You know, one of the biggest things about this addiction is because it's so easy to hide, you can lie, we can manipulate, we can do all of these things to make people believe that great things are happening. Meanwhile, we're crashing and burning and hitting the bottom. So that was my first of 4 suicide attempts. Got through South Carolina, got sent down to Texas, and again, regained my rank, went to leadership school, got back into a position of leadership, and guess what? Did it all over again. Did it all over again. This time I lost my career in the military. And again, my commander sat there while I was in 2 weeks, spent 2 weeks in a civilian acute psychiatric hospital, took me into the conference room with my OIC and my commander and said, we are going to let you out under honorable conditions because we don't know what to do with you, but we want you to be able to get the help you need. But nobody told me what that help looked like. Nobody said to me, this is the help you need to get. This is what's happening to you. So now I'm a civilian. Now I'm a veteran, right? Meanwhile, my wife now is separated from me because she knows I'm just destructive as all can be, and she wants to protect our kids, which rightly so. Rightly so. She's doing the right things. So now we're separated. She's in South Carolina. I moved back to my home state of Pennsylvania. And now I'm going out getting regular jobs. And by the way, transition from the military to civilian life is hard enough. You throw in trying to do it with a gambling addiction, let me tell you something, it's not easy. I went through 5 jobs within the first year, and all of them I left because it was interfering with my ability to gamble. This went on for several more years. It was around 2006. My divorce had been finalized. I had been in yet another job. I remember it was a Friday night. I drove down to a casino in Pennsylvania because by now there were casinos all over Pennsylvania. Drove to a casino in Pennsylvania. While I'm driving to that casino, I'm punching the roof of my car saying, turn around, you know what's going to happen, you're going to walk out of there with nothing. And I happened to glance up in the mirror and I saw my face. And my face was bright red and there were tears running down my cheeks as I'm pounding the roof of my car, but as my foot is continuing to hit the accelerator, driving me toward that casino. Get up into the casino, into the parking garage. I'm still bright red. I'm still about as ridden with anxiety as you can possibly get. I get out of the car, I walk up to the door, I open it, I hear the sounds, I smell the smells, I see the people, and all of a sudden, there it was. It was that quick. It was as though somebody shot me with something. You talk about sick. I was completely sick. I was at the point where I could take no more. I finally started to look around, and I found that the VA had a gambling treatment program, which nobody in the VA told me about because they didn't even know about it until one person pulled out an old packet, blew the dust off it, and said, here, maybe this is something that'll help you. So I made the calls. I set it up. It's in Cleveland, Ohio. I drove myself to Cleveland, gambled along the way, so I had my last hurrah. Got to Cleveland, got in there, got processed in, and within 1 hour, after 6 years of not knowing what the hell was going on with me, somebody said something and I went, finally, somebody gets it. Finally, somebody gets it. Somebody understands me. I went into that treatment program. I was there for 28 days. I got into their aftercare program. I stayed in Cleveland for a full year. Kept going to treatment, went to Gamblers Anonymous. I was faithful to Gamblers Anonymous until I started to feel good. I got this. I don't have an urge to gamble. I feel strong again. I feel like myself. I feel like that person I know I can be. I don't need this meeting anymore. I don't need this for myself anymore. And slowly but surely it started to come back. In the meantime, I moved back to Pennsylvania. I reconnected with my high school sweetheart of all things, and that's a whole other story. That alone could take an hour. But we hadn't spoken to each other in over 20 years, and we just reconnected casually, no expectations. Within a few weeks, we realized we were meant to be together. So we got married in 2014. By the way, during this time that I had been in my gambling, I lost contact with my children for over 2 years. Not one word with my kids for over 2 years during the most critical years of them growing up. But did finally reconnect with them. In fact, now my daughter lives 10 minutes away from me, and my son calls me every day. And I'll tell you more about that in a second. But I met the woman of my high school sweetheart. We had a great relationship. We got married, but all during this time, the addiction was slowly and surely building back up. This time it was manifesting in a different way. I was manipulating money, but the same feeling was there. That feeling of adrenaline, that feeling of excitement, that feeling of hiding this feels good. To the point where I got to the end of 2019, and it was so bad that now I was starting, and this whole time, by the way, I was doing this through taking out credit cards, taking out loans, taking out all this stuff, so my wife never knew what was happening. Well, it finally compiled to the point where I couldn't beat it anymore. And I had also reached my lowest point probably ever. So on the evening of January the 3rd, 2020, it was a Friday night, I told my wife, I feel sick, I'm going to sit on my couch. I sat there the entire weekend, deciding whether I wanted to live or die. And I can remember, and I tell this story because I chuckled even when it happened over that weekend. As serious as that weekend was, right in the middle of that weekend, I heard Morgan Freeman in my head from Shawshank Redemption saying, get busy living or get busy dying. Right? And I chuckled about it when it happened, but it was serious. It was serious. I had been carrying around for weeks a knife in my pocket. I have an acre of property at home. I had a knife in my pocket. Had she found out what I was doing, I was going to walk to the back of my property, and I had an exit plan in place. That was going to be number 5, and guess what? Number 5, I was not going to fail. I was not going to fail. But I made the decision in that weekend to get busy living. And on that Monday, I turned myself back into a VA center, and that's really where recovery began for me. I went back to the gambling treatment program. I got myself involved in a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, which I attend to this day. I go every week faithfully. I was just there 2 nights ago. I got onto an online problem gambling support group. I started a podcast for military service members and veterans as it relates to gambling. By the way, that's called Fall In, if you're ever looking for it. And I wrote a book about what I'm going through. Now, I work as a counselor, and I counsel people who struggle with gambling, specifically, and I try to emphasize on military people. I speak all over the place about this exact topic because I feel it's so important to take this population. I wish somebody had come to me in the middle of my gambling and said, look, I noticed this is happening. I'm wondering if this could be a problem for you. Even that one thing could have made a difference. Would it have? I'm not guaranteeing anything. But could it have made a difference? Yeah, it could have. Okay, can you go to the next part? Ask anyone who's ever been through a gambling addiction if it feels like an addiction, and the response is likely to be an immediate and undeniable yes. That's what's missing from this, by the way. I call it the Jekyll and Hyde experience. You're living this life of a perfectly normal human being to everybody around you. It even feels good to you while you're doing it. It felt good to me to live like a regular person while there's this person with an insatiable drive to gamble there at the same time. The conflict between the two is indescribable. The conflict between these two thought patterns is indescribable. Okay? And I thought telling my story would help to kind of emphasize that a little bit. It's so important to understand this is very real. This is very real, and this does real damage. Can you go next, please? Okay? So let's talk about gambling as an addiction. What are some of the things that are behind it? Go ahead. Much like drugs or alcohol, it can lead to an addiction. You can go through that whole page then too. Biological factors, serotonin, dopamine. Dopamine is the feel-good stuff. Dopamine is the stuff that when we feel like we're in the zone is what's kind of driving it all, is dopamine. And for student athletes, dopamine is huge. You know, just like Jamie and Patrick were talking about. The same thing applies to military personnel. Right? Next slide, please. Oh, there. Okay, keep going. You can keep going. Environmental. This addiction doesn't care where you come from, but people from a lower socioeconomic area tend to be a bit more at risk because they don't have the financial means that people, you know, at higher socioeconomic areas have. They don't have maybe some of the same structures, some of the same guidance, okay? So they tend to be a bit more at risk, and that specifically applies in the military, primarily to lower enlisted. Enlisted people are coming in from areas of cities where maybe they didn't even know, you know, they get a job for a few bucks an hour, or they're not working at all. Now all of a sudden they're being handed a paycheck when they're being given housing, right? And there's things all around military bases that are saying, spend your money here. We'll give you a loan. We'll give you a car. We're going to give you all this stuff. So now you have an at-risk population. Financial strain. Again, not very uncommon with lower enlisted. The adrenaline lust, military environments, particularly among military service members. Next slide, please. There we go. And now I'm going to turn it back over to McKenna.
All right, so this one here, he mentioned this before, that service members and veterans have 3 to 5 times greater risk for developing a gambling addiction. And before it was mentioned that college athletes are also at an increased risk. So here at the Air Force Academy, that's doubled already. And 6 to 11% of service members, which now we're seeing to be around 10 to 11% of service members meet criteria for serious gambling problems, which is a huge amount of the military population. And the question is why? So I'm going to talk first about a mission first focus, which is kind of the same as the warrior ethos here. This is the Army version of the warrior ethos up here. I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. So you see that first line, I will always place the mission first. We teach this not only to the service members, but especially to our junior officers who are going to come in, and they're going to lead these junior enlisted, senior enlisted service members. Mission comes first, right? And the problem when we see that is people feel the need that they need to leave their problems at the door. They need to come in and only focus on the job and on the mission, and if they have a problem, deal with it at home, you know? And we talk about certain things. We see trainings every year for suicidal behavior, for alcoholism, for depression, that we sit through the GMTs and we sign them and we say we've seen them and we know what the resources are. I have never seen one for gambling, personally. And you have to think about the fact that when you make something mission first, a service member does not feel comfortable coming to you with certain issues. And another issue that happens a lot in the military is that punitive action is the first thing that comes to mind when you see somebody with a gambling problem. I actually worked with a service member who had a pretty severe gambling issue, lost a lot of money. We had to take turns going to pick him up because he got his car impounded. And nobody was really doing anything about it. The leadership knew that this was happening. They knew that they were requiring us to go pick him up and drop him off and take him to the grocery store because he couldn't afford a car. And they weren't really questioning, you know, what do we do to help him outside of that? What's something that's not a Band-Aid for this issue? And so they referred him to financial counseling multiple times, which is just another, you know, E5 petty officer with a collateral duty to put on their eval. And they follow an algorithm and they go through what they should be doing financially to stay out of debt. And no one ever referred him to any kind of mental health counseling, psychiatric, behavioral health, anything. It was just, he's doing it again, send him to finance over and over. He ends up getting separated from the military, not really in touch anymore. I know that there was a suicide attempt. He did live through the suicide attempt, and I'm not really sure where he's at right now with his problem. But I know that he did not get the help that he needed when he was serving, and then they kicked him out. And yeah, of course, financial literacy is something that's important. It's taught to us when we're in the military, especially for junior enlisted. And it's something that, as Dave mentioned, it should be something that comes up during treatment. But it shouldn't be, you have a problem, we're going to punish you for it, we're going to take your rank, and we're going to send you to a financial counselor over and over and over and do nothing else to solve the root of the problem. So if we come back to that, you know, you mentioned some other things, competitiveness, traditions of gambling, belonging to an officer club or an enlisted club. And then these are the ones that really kind of, I've noticed, boredom, loneliness, trauma, and grief. So you're on a deployment, you know, there's not a lot to do. You're out there, you go to work, you come back, there's nothing. A lot of people are doing sports betting out there while they're gambling. A lot are while they're deployed. And a lot of people are doing it now while they're not deployed. They can be on shore duty. I worked at the NSA on a 24/7 watch floor, and this is something that was super interesting when we don't have a lot going on. So I'm sitting there with headphones on and I'm listening to Russian comms coming in, and I just sit there. And when there's nothing going on, we don't have low side or like internet access, like normal internet access. We only have the top secret side. We can't do anything. We don't have our phones. We can't bring books in. We can't play games. So we're doing nothing. And our junior officer, so it's just, we have one JO. It was an ensign straight out of the Naval Academy. And I'll just preface this by saying that I know that Navy tradition is unique and it's very different from the Air Force. And there have been a lot of stories that I'll tell my mom and I'll be like, this is crazy, can you believe this happened? She says, that would never happen in the Air Force. And I never believed her too, right? I was like, well, you're an officer, like maybe you just don't know. You're in the National Guard, like maybe that's different. She hated that. And then I got into this joint service enlisted program. And I would tell my colleagues about this, and they'd say that would never happen in the Air Force. And I was like, wow, well, that's pretty crazy. But anyway, this junior officer in charge of us, what he would do is he would say, okay, well, if you're betting on this game, if you're on FanDuel, you're on DraftKings, you guys can take a PT break, go to your car, you can watch the game, you can keep up on your phone. And then the people who are not invested in this, they're not betting, they're not watching the game, they'll stay here and they'll cover all your comms. So they're literally incentivizing taking part in this gambling because you get a break. You get to go sit in your car for 2 hours while everybody else is doing your work. And there's no oversight. There's nobody else in charge. You have 10 junior enlisted, and you got 1 ensign out of the Naval Academy, and that's it. And to the Navy, you know, this has kind of been an experience, not just with JOs. Like with the chief, it's been a similar experience, and it's been like this for me since I joined the military. And nobody really, you know, sees anything wrong with that. They're just like, this is how it is. It's whatever, you know. Which is crazy, and maybe it wouldn't happen in the Air Force, I don't know. But I think that's really interesting, and I think it's important that, at least when we talk to the cadets this afternoon, that they understand the impact that they can have, and they need to have an eye out for these things. And to them, maybe they don't have a gambling problem, and it's just something fun, and it makes sense to them. But somebody could have a gambling problem. They could be giving somebody a gambling problem. They could be sitting there incentivizing it, and they need to just understand repercussions of their actions, you know. So I think that it's important to share those kind of stories with them. Trauma and grief are other big ones, and these are just like legitimate comorbidities for developing gambling disorder. A lot of people also have depression. They also have alcoholism. They have PTSD. And if you have any of those conditions, you are at a huge increased risk for developing gambling addiction. And, you know, if you pile them all up, you know, you're a student athlete, you are in the military, active military, you have PTSD, and now you have gambling disorder. It just keeps going. It's just a rolling wheel, and it just gets worse and worse. So I think that's really important. You know the next one? You can keep going. And right there. All right. So this is the first publication that I actually did with Kindbridge, is this top part here. It's about how there's over 3,000 slot machines on OCONUS military installations. So the research primarily focused on military bases in Germany. And what we did is we sent somebody over there, and they interviewed all of the staff at these casinos or slots or wherever they are to ask if they're implementing any kind of responsible gambling strategies. None of them even knew what that was, for the first thing. Second of all, there were a couple that we asked, and we were like, well, are players allowed to set like self-limiting rules in place, like how much time they can play, how much money they can spend? Can they see their stats on the machine? None of that. So basically, we had a big poster, and it was, you know, we have each military base and each gambling strategy and just a bunch of red X's because nobody was doing anything. And it's interesting because actually in most states, these are legal requirements for casinos to have. And overseas, there's absolutely no oversight. Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, they actually tried to bring the slot machines over here to the continental U.S., and their JAG was looking it over and reading all the paperwork, and they found the policy that said absolutely no gambling can be run by military or the DoD on U.S. soil because of the danger that it poses to our service members. So they're aware of the danger, they're aware of the risks, and they just see, well, OCONUS, technically it's not U.S. soil, even if it's on a U.S. installation, and they do it anyway. And the DoD actually profits over $100 million every year only from the slots and machines on OCONUS installations. And most of this money does go to the MWR, which they see is coming back and, you know, benefiting the service member. But none of it goes to putting any kind of responsible gambling measures in place. And then downtime, we talked about this a little bit. Hurry up and wait. It happens here. It happens on deployment. People get bored. It's an opportunity. When you have something that's on your phone right in front of you, you can spend your time doing that. Poker games, start trading money, you know, pretty obvious. And then loneliness, same thing. You can go to the next one, I think. Back to you, Dave.
Yeah, just something real quick related to downtime. I can remember when I did my expert field medical badge, it was a 2-week process. During that 2-week process, I probably had 2/3 of my time there was probably downtime. So had I been in the U.S. and in this day and age and had access to my phone, there was a lot of opportunity for me to do sports betting during that time. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, kind of the Bible for clinicians to diagnose mental health disorders, in 2013, in the 5th edition, again, took gambling from an impulse control disorder to an addiction, okay? And then came up with 9 criteria. And if you could go to the next slide, I'm going to go in a little deeper in these. The first criteria, and I'm just going to very briefly describe what that could mean in real terms. Go ahead. So, need to gamble with increasing amounts to achieve the desired results. Okay, you know what? Last week I made 1 sports bet. This week I'm doing the parlays. I'm increasing it, right? Or I bought a $1 scratch-off ticket. It's not fun anymore. I need a $5 one. I need a $10 one. I need a $20 one to get the same feeling from it. Restless or irritable when trying to cut down or stop gambling. That's self-explanatory. Repeated unsuccessful efforts to control, cut back, or stop gambling. I've done it more times than I can possibly tell you, and I've talked to more gamblers in recovery who've probably 30 times tried to stop gambling and just couldn't do it on their own. Frequent thoughts about gambling. Reliving past gambling, specifically wins. For the problem gambler, the disordered gambler, they remember the wins, they don't remember the losses, because the wins are what they anchor to try and drive them to go back. Often gamble when feeling distressed. That escape thing, what McKenna just talked about, the loneliness, all those things that are involved. Okay, go ahead. After losing money, returning to get back your losses. That's called chasing. Jamie, I think, alluded to that earlier. Chasing is I went into a casino or I made a sports bet and I lost a bunch of money and I'm like, oh, heck no. I've won on this before. I'm going back. I'm getting that money back and continuing to do that until there's nothing left. Okay? Lying to hide gambling activity. 99% of people you talk to, if you talk to somebody who's been through a gambling addiction, will tell you they've lied to at least one person, mostly themselves, first and foremost, okay? Risking a close relationship, a job, or a school or job opportunity because of gambling. I did that. I went to so many jobs I couldn't tell you. I lost my military career because of it. Relying on others to help with money problems caused by gambling, okay? So after a while, the disordered gambler is spending their gambling money to do, what should be on things like rent, mortgage, car payment. All of a sudden, that money doesn't exist anymore. It's all gambling money at some point when the addiction gets bad enough. Next slide, please. Okay, so you recognize a problem, and a lot of this is for the junior developing leader, but I think it's important for you to see. Number one is acknowledging the struggle. Okay? Not sitting down and looking somebody in the eye and saying, hey, Airman, you have a gambling addiction. No, it's more like, look, here's what I'm noticing. You're becoming more distant. You're borrowing money from people. You're not showing up to different functions. What's going on? A lot of this, I've heard, can be associated with a gambling addiction. Is there something going on I need to know about? Okay? Direct them to available resources. Here in Colorado, there are a ton of resources available. Jamie spoke briefly about the Colorado Coalition, which I'm going to mention here again, but also Kindbridge Behavioral Health right now, our sister behavioral group to Kindbridge Research Institute, for any active duty service member, veteran, cadet, ROTC student who may be experiencing a gambling problem can now get free telehealth treatment specifically for gambling through Kindbridge. Okay? Groups like mindfulness and stress reduction, peer connection. So there's a lot available right now. Next slide, please. Gamblers Anonymous is a 12-step group. We've all heard about 12-step groups. Hi, my name's Dave. I'm a gambler. Everybody says, hi, Dave, right? Well, there are people who kind of associate this with a religious group or a cult or something like that. It's not. It's gamblers helping gamblers. It's connecting. One of the best ways for a gambler to recovery, and I didn't realize this in my first time through, is connecting with other people who've been through the same thing. It's how we stay strong, okay? The Problem Gambling Coalition of Colorado. It's an advocacy group in this state, all right, that focuses solely on the subject of disordered gambling in the state of Colorado and also offers many resources to gamblers who might be struggling, okay? Go ahead. And the Department of Veterans Affairs offers residential treatment for problem gamblers, both in Cleveland, Ohio, and now in Las Vegas, Nevada, for veterans, any veteran, and active duty service members on a case-by-case basis at no cost to that veteran or service member. It's part of their benefit, okay? So there's a lot of resources available out there for the disordered gambler who needs help. There are plenty of resources available, okay? But it all starts with that conversation and saying, listen, it looks like you're struggling. Let's have a conversation. Okay, next slide. McKenna?
Okay, so really briefly, I'm just going to talk about the scholarship program that Kindbridge has. This is available to veterans, active duty, ROTC, or family members across the entire country. You can sign up for the scholarship right here on the website. It's just you fill out the form right in front of you. And, you know, there's not something that comes up a lot, especially where in my background, which was in the intelligence community, is people are worried about their clearance. They're worried about their command finding out. They're worried that if they ask for help, you know, they're going to lose their job or their livelihood, you know. And that's happens a lot in the intelligence community, but it happens everywhere. So something that you know is like this is anonymous. It's not associated with the military. So what we know is that these are the options that Kindbridge offers, and it's not necessarily that you would have each and every one of these things. They'll evaluate you exactly where you're at, what you need, and provide this to you as needed. A lot of people do like virtual teletherapy. We have a lot of counselors. I believe Dave is one of them. If you call, he will be one of the people who can answer the phone. They can walk you through this. They'll take you in. They'll sign you up for appointments, anything that you need. And I think that this is great. It's a great resource to have to either, you know, for yourself, for your family, or for your athletes, just to put it out there because they don't have to go through any official channels with their command, with the military, and it's the easiest way, I think, to ask for help and get it because it's fully funded. They don't need to worry about using their TRICARE, paying out of pocket, or anything like that. All right, you can go next slide.
All right, so here's where I want to go right here. This is the slide, okay? We're going to kind of wrap this up. I am going to skip a couple slides because we are down on time, and I do apologize for that. But the main thing here, especially as I'm speaking and we're speaking to young leaders, is it's important to understand that if one of your team is struggling, how do we best approach that team member so that we can support our readiness as a unit and we can support that service member, okay? Service members struggling with a gambling addiction can seriously impact readiness. A gambling addiction, if somebody knows that somebody's struggling with a gambling addiction, it is not difficult for them to take advantage of that fact. And if somebody's walking around with a security clearance, that's danger. Okay? So recognizing that that's happening and approaching that service member, acknowledging that something's going on and that we need to get you to help is so important for that individual, for you as a leader, for leaders, and for the unit as a whole. Okay? Save a life and speak up when the signs are present. There's a little role play exercise, and we're going to skip through that. If you can just go to the end of the QR at the end. Yes, there's another QR. We had a role play exercise, and one of the things that came out of that role play exercise the last time I did it was that people felt very uncomfortable having that conversation. What I say to leaders, have that conversation whether it's uncomfortable or not because it's critical. If we're going to help that service member, if we're going to help our unit, then we need to have that conversation. So I'm honored to be standing here right now, and, you know, on behalf of McKenna and myself, just want to seriously thank you for your time. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Bear with me a little bit more as we wrap up here. Just want to cover a couple things, right? So you saw a lot of this was focused on harm reduction and intervention, right? Whether it be yourself, a teammate, a coworker, right? Any of that stuff, we want to make sure we get the harm reduction and the intervention. So if you know somebody, if you start seeing the signs, make sure you work with our compliance office. We'll make sure we'll get you the right resources. We have resources here. We'll get out a list. There's a lot of different classifications of people in this room, right? So we'll make sure we get out a list of all the different resources based on your classification. Be prepared to discuss this with your athletes, right? They're going to get a very similar brief this afternoon. It won't be exactly the same because they'll target it a little bit more to our athletes. Dylan Small is going to be there to brief them on what are the resources available to them but make sure we're cognizant of what's going on so we can intervene before it gets to anything too crazy, right? You probably didn't expect to come to a compliance briefing and hear you can gamble, right? That was said multiple times. So what can you gamble on? You can't gamble on any sport that the NCAA sponsors a championship on at any level. So little league all the way up to professional sports, right? We can't gamble on any of those, but you can gamble on things like car racing, horse racing, MMA, boxing even. We have a boxing team, but that's not an NCAA sport, right? All the normal casino games that you see out there, right? Stay out of the sports book, go to the other stuff. Those are all things that you can gamble on if you choose to gamble. Obviously, keep in mind all the things we've discussed here, right? And making sure you don't get into that disordered gambling. But those things are permissible under NCAA rules. So, any other questions we have? All right, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. I'll have Germ throw back the second slide here. So if you missed the QR code, you can do that, or you can make sure you signed in down here. Instructor meeting at noon in the boxing room. Thank you, folks. The one in there will be an actual mic.
Oh, yeah.